There comes a moment, often in silence, often alone, where you finally see the truth not as a story, not as a justification, but as it is. You were not confused. You were not too sensitive. You were not imagining it. They knew what they were doing. The lies were not accidental. The gaslighting was not random. The manipulation was not clumsy. It was precise, calculated, intentional, because to them, it was a game. They played with your loyalty. They tested your boundaries. They wore masks and smiled while slowly cutting pieces off your soul. But here's the truth they never expected to face. Every game they played now exists in their memory, not as a victory, but as a haunting. You walked away with pain, but they walked away with a curse, the weight of their own conscience. And as time moves forward, that weight does not lift, it grows. Because you can walk away from a person, but you can't walk away from yourself. Their cruel games will become their endless nightmare, the illusion of control through manipulation. Cruelty often disguises itself in control. It doesn't always shout. It doesn't always strike. Sometimes it whispers. It plans. It pretends to care while pulling strings behind the curtain. Those who play with others' emotions, who craft scenarios to confuse, trap, or emotionally drain someone, aren't simply being careless. They're exercising a warped sense of control. And for a while, it may even appear to work. Manipulators often thrive in the early stages of their schemes. They read people with chilling precision. They find your insecurities, your compassion, your patterns of forgiveness, and they use those against you. To them, your empathy becomes a tool. Your loyalty becomes leverage. They study your silence, interpret your pauses, and test your limits, not to understand you better, but to see how far they can stretch your boundaries before you break. But what they never seem to grasp, what they are too arrogant or emotionally bankrupt to understand, is that control built on manipulation is unsustainable. It's like building a house on sand. Eventually it collapses under the weight of its own dishonesty, because true strength isn't in how many people you can confuse or how deeply you can deceive someone. It's in how honestly you can relate to others without masks, without games. People who play these games often believe they're in charge of the narrative. They edit the truth in their heads. They rewrite the story so that they're always the victim or the hero, never the antagonist. But reality does not bend forever to delusion. When the person they tried to manipulate walks away, when the one they thought they broke starts to rebuild, suddenly the story they were so sure they were writing begins to unravel. This illusion of control only lasts as long as the person being manipulated remains unaware. The moment awareness is born, when the fog lifts and the pattern is seen clearly, that illusion shatters, and nothing haunts the manipulator more than the moment they realize they've lost their grip, not just on the person they played with, but on the entire illusion they built to protect themselves from the truth of who they really are. Because in the end, those who seek control through cruelty are not powerful, they're deeply afraid. They fear being seen for what they are. So they project their chaos onto others. But the mind that deceives others is always deceiving itself the most. They may convince you for a time. They may even convince others. But they cannot escape the reckoning that comes from living a life built on games. And when that illusion finally collapses, when there's no one left to play with and nowhere left to hide, that's when their nightmare begins. The moral debt of betrayal. Every betrayal creates a debt. Not always one you can see, not always one you can touch, but a debt that exists nonetheless, etched silently into the fabric of a person's life. And like all debts, it accrues interest over time. The cruel don't see this at first. In the moment of betrayal, there's often a twisted sense of triumph. They believe they've won, that their manipulation worked, that their silence, their abandonment, or their deception gave them the upper hand. What they don't understand is that betrayal doesn't just wound the person on the receiving end, it stains the one who delivered it. To betray someone who trusted you is to violate a sacred contract, an unspoken agreement of loyalty, honesty, and basic human decency. And while the one betrayed is left with pain, confusion, and heartbreak, the betrayer is left with something far more corrosive, a conscience in conflict. For a time, that conscience may remain buried. It might be silenced by distractions, relationships, achievements, or even denial. But conscience has a memory, and it doesn't forget. There are echoes of our actions that return long after the moment has passed, especially when we've hurt someone who never meant to harm us. The weight of having knowingly taken advantage of a kind heart cannot be carried lightly. Sooner or later, it begins to surface. The cruel often think they've moved on, but you'll notice something. They're never truly at peace. Their laughter becomes louder, but forced. Their relationships more frequent, but shallower. They seek noise because silence brings too much truth. In quiet moments, when the lights go off, when the mask slips, when there's no one to impress, that's when the memories creep in. The words they said, the moments they walked away, the trust they shattered, and most haunting of all, the realization that they can never undo it. Betrayal is not just a moment, it's a fracture in the soul of both the betrayed and the betrayer. And while the betrayed can heal, grow, and rebuild, the betrayer must live with what they've done. There's no healing from a choice you refuse to take responsibility for. And that's where the nightmare begins, not in being punished by the outside world, but in being slowly devoured by the inside one. You see, the laws of this world are not just written in courtrooms or governments. There are deeper laws, moral laws, that govern the human heart. And when those are broken, something inside us begins to decay. Betrayal initiates a process of internal erosion. And unless there's true repentance, true recognition, it doesn't stop. It festers, it rots, and it eventually consumes. There's a deep irony here. Those who betray often believe they've gained something. Maybe freedom, maybe power, maybe a sense of control, but in reality, they've lost far more than they understand. They've lost their own integrity, their peace, their ability to fully trust anyone again. Because deep down, they know what they're capable of. The one who is betrayed, they carry pain, but that pain transforms. It can become strength, clarity, and purpose. But for the one who betrayed, the guilt lingers. It shapes their dreams, their fears, their relationships. Because betrayal doesn't disappear, it haunts. And the cruelest part of it all? No one has to punish them. Life already is. The psychology of conscience? Conscience is a quiet force. It doesn't scream. It doesn't knock down doors. It doesn't chase people through life like some visible storm. Instead, it waits. It watches. And when the time is right, it speaks. Not in loud judgments, but in subtle discomforts. This is what the cruel so often fail to understand. When they play their games, when they manipulate, discard, or betray, they aren't just damaging others, they are damaging themselves. Because the human mind is not built to escape truth forever. It can be distracted, numbed, or temporarily convinced by lies, but it cannot be permanently silenced. Sooner or later, every unacknowledged act begins to echo in the halls of the conscience. At first, these echoes are small, a moment of guilt, a flicker of shame. a brief discomfort when they remember your name or see your face. But as time passes, those moments stack. The mind begins to revisit what was done, not because someone else is forcing it to, but because the conscience does not forget what the ego tries to bury. The manipulator may have laughed after the betrayal. They may have convinced themselves you were weak, that you deserved what happened, or that they had no choice. But deep down, they know what really happened, and the more they try to run from it, the louder the conscience becomes. The lies they told themselves lose their power. The justifications don't hold, and when they look in the mirror, they can no longer avoid the most frightening realization. I did that. No one made me. I chose to hurt someone who trusted me. This is the beginning of the internal collapse, not because they were caught, not because anyone exposed them, but because they were never able to escape themselves. No punishment from the outside world compares to the psychological torment of knowing you violated your own code, of realizing you've become the kind of person you used to despise. That's the terrifying part of cruelty. It changes the one who commits it. It doesn't just harm the victim, it reshapes the perpetrator. Every betrayal leaves a mark not only on the one betrayed, but also on the betrayer's identity. And no matter how they dress it up, no matter how well they pretend or perform, they can't silence the knowledge of what they did. Some try to outrun this with addictions, distractions, or constant noise. They fill their schedules, jump from relationship to relationship, or seek validation from people who don't know who they really are. But the conscience doesn't fade in chaos. It waits in the silence, and it always returns when they least expect it. During a quiet drive, in the middle of the night, or in those vulnerable moments before sleep, it whispers reminders, it paints memories, it replays choices, and the longer they resist, the deeper the suffering becomes, because this isn't punishment from the world, it's a punishment from within. The cruel games they once enjoyed, the schemes they once mastered, eventually turn into regrets they can't erase. And the truth is, no one has to tell them what they did was wrong. They already know. That's the curse of conscience. You see, you can lie to others. You can fool them, manipulate them, hide behind charm, control, and distractions. But the one person you can never fully escape is yourself. And when your conscience turns against you, it becomes a kind of prison no wall can contain and no key can unlock. That's when the nightmare truly begins. The rise of the one who is broken. There's a silence that follows betrayal. It's not peaceful. It's not calming. It's hollow, like standing in the ruins of something you thought would last. And in that silence, you begin to question everything, your worth, your instincts, your memory. You wonder how someone could look you in the eyes, wear the mask of care, but it's also where something begins. People often think being broken is the end, that once your trust is shattered, your spirit bruised, and your belief in others damaged, there's no coming back. But what they don't realize is this: being broken is not death. It's rebirth. The version of you that existed before the pain may be gone, but something stronger is emerging in its place. The person they tried to break starts to wake up, and not just emotionally, but intellectually, spiritually, and psychologically. You begin to see patterns. You remember all the little signs you ignored, the discomfort you silenced, the moments your gut told you something wasn't right. And that awareness becomes your power. You stop blaming yourself. You stop begging for closure. You start rebuilding, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. This is the part the betrayer never plans for. They think your pain will paralyze you, that you'll stay broken, that you'll forever be defined by what they did. But pain has a way of transforming into discipline, into focus, into a clarity that no comfort ever gave you. The tears you once cried become the ink of your wisdom. The sleepless nights become lessons carved into your backbone, and slowly, silently, you begin to rise. But you don't rise with vengeance. You rise with vision, the kind of vision that sees through people now, that recognizes manipulation before it starts, that no longer tolerates what you once accepted. And this is what shakes those who tried to control you. They don't understand how the person they discarded now walks with deeper purpose. They don't recognize the new version of you because that version isn't here to beg, chase, or prove. It's here to live. And here's the irony. The person who hurt you often stays stuck. While you're growing, they're replaying. While you're healing, they're hiding. While you're discovering your strength, they're wrestling with the guilt of what they lost. Because they didn't just hurt you, they lost access to someone who would have stood by them. They threw away something real for something temporary, and they know it. The rise of the broken is never loud. It doesn't need to be. It happens in the discipline to say no, in the strength to walk away, in the quiet resolve to never let someone dim your light again. What once shattered you now shapes you. And you no longer fear the pain, you respect it, because it built you. You are no longer who you were. And that's the greatest loss for those who played their games thinking you'd never change. They expected you to collapse, but you didn't. You endured, you adapted, and now you've become the very storm they never saw coming. The return of accountability. There is a law woven into the fabric of life, a quiet, undeniable truth. What you put into the world eventually comes back to you. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in the way you expect, but life has a way of circling back. And when it does, it rarely knocks. It enters quietly, often disguised as consequence. Those who played their cruel games believed they were untouchable. They thought they could manipulate without cost, walk away without weight, and rewrite the story without accountability. For a while they did. They smiled, they posted, they moved on, or so it seemed. But life isn't governed by appearances. It's governed by principles. And those principles cannot be cheated. Every lie spoken, every trust broken, every time they chose selfishness over integrity, it all went somewhere, not into the void, but into the mirror of their own future. Because when you treat people as disposable, you don't just lose them, you lose a part of yourself. And the universe has a strange way of balancing what people try to avoid, not out of revenge, but out of rhythm. This is what begins to unfold. The ones who once laughed at your pain start to face silence in their own lives. The same confusion they gave you shows up in their own relationships. The emptiness they left in you begins to echo inside them. Not because you wished it, but because life teaches through reflection. They become their own lesson. You never had to seek revenge. You never had to explain. Time did it for you. Truth doesn't need to shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it speaks with power. Because the consequences they thought they'd outrun were never gone. They were simply waiting for the right moment. And now that moment has arrived. Their cruel games have ended, but their accountability has just begun, not because you demanded it, but because life did.